safe space. We ain't never give a reason you should hide. Compile all your questions, we taking the quest. Join Tarsha on this journey to discover the rest. Go.
Welcome to the Adoption Journey podcast. I am your host, Tarsha Smith, and thank you for joining us on yet another journey. I guess that's what I'm going to call it every week, a new journey. And before I forget, don't forget to go over to Patreon, family. Like, you're going to get everything there. You'll get extreme hip hop classes, vegan recipes, and the podcast, like all of me in one place. So check out the Patreon. Today in the building, we have a mom by adoption or adoptive mom, Jamel. You okay? Okay.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
No worries. I had the distinct pleasure to meet her and give her all the love and all the hugs a couple of weeks back. So that was really, really dope. And so, hey, Jamel.
Hey, Tarsha, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for coming and agreeing to be a guest on the podcast.
Yeah, I was excited. I love your podcast. I love like everyone's stories, all the different sides. Like, you've had birth moms and adoptees and adoptive moms, just listening to everybody's different stories. I love it.
Right.
So,
thank you so much. That's the purpose of the platform, just a safe place where everyone can come and tell their story, because everybody has a story and they are all different.
Yes.
And they're usually wild.
Right. And that's the thing. It's like everybody says, like, one thing you like, once you get, I would say it's like adoptive parent, because you don't know a lot. Once you kind of like research, not just adoption, but like the reality of adoption, and you get into it, you're like, oh, there's some stuff.
Listen,
it's some stories.
It's some stuff. That's it right there.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It can be a lot. So I want to start out and tell me how you decided to become an adoptive mom. Like, where does that story start?
So, like a lot of families, we came to adoption after going through like a fertility journey. And for me, adoption was always part of my, part of the things to look at. I wasn't exclusively focused on like IVF and IUI, because we have a lot of in my mom's side of the family have multiple adoption stories. Really? So that was it's not a foreign concept to me. It wasn't like, I didn't have any of that. So, for me, I dealt with infertility for about almost 10 years in terms of like surgery. I had uterine fibroids. I also found out I had some hormonal imbalances. I think that the surgeon I had with well intentions, I think he was a little aggressive. I think he actually caused more damage with the surgeries that he did. So we did an IVF cycle. It was not successful. And I just felt like, I don't want to do this to my body again. It is a lot. Like, so it's a lot, and infertility is a lot. Like, one of the things, like, it's one of those things, like, if you haven't experienced it, you really have no idea what it's like to experience that, to have the diagnosis, to kind of have what you think is going to happen, not happen, and then to go through the physical, testing, blood draws. When you go through IVF, you are getting blood draws every other day. You're getting transvaginal ultrasounds every other day, different surgery, like all those things, the financial aspect, the mental and emotional aspect, you feel like isolated because you feel like I'm the only person that's going through this. You feel like this outcast, especially when it's like you look around, this person having a baby, this person's having a baby, this person's having a baby. And then people are looking at you like, what y'all, people, what you waiting on? Y'all not going to have no baby.
Okay,
You're
right. And I want people to stop doing that, because you don't know what journey, listen, you don't know what people are going through. I myself am even guilty of asking that question. I've had to check myself. I start asking because you don't know. And most people are very nice, and they're like, oh, we just want to wait, and
Yeah.
we're not, but you really,
And you don't know.
you
Like, you
really
could be asking
don't know.
somebody, they could have just
Mm-hmm.
heard that their embryos died or they miscarried. Like, you don't. And I feel the same way about people asking single women about being married. Like, you don't know. It's like for me, those two things. And maybe I didn't get married till I was in my mid-30s. So I endure a lot of, where's your boyfriend? You're not getting married. And then when I had a boyfriend, when y'all getting married? What are you going to, and it's, so that's like personal pet peeve of mine. And now most people don't mean anything bad. They just are like, they want to see what they think is doing well. And
especially
they want to see
when you get around the family.
Right. So, I know, and most people are well-intentioned when they ask that. They're not trying to be like cruel. I mean, some people just in your business, but they don't mean to be invasive or mean like that. But it's, when you're going through something like that, it's always on the surface. Even when you're able to like button it up, it's, it's under the surface. So that's it for me. Like I said, I just was like, I don't want to go through, getting up, sticking myself twice a day.
Let me ask you this. When you were going through this, what kind of support did you have? Because that's a lot.
So it's interesting. My husband was, my main support. I didn't tell a lot of my family just because, they kind of knew the situation, but they didn't. Okay. So I kind of was, I don't want to say going through it, but we didn't have the support group yet. So, so one of the things I did, I started a blog. So so this was 2013 is when I found out I had uterine fibroids. Okay. So I'm like, this is internet, but not like it is now. So I'm Googling and I don't see a lot, or I just see honestly like white women. So I'm like, okay.
Couldn't get that, trying to swallow. That's real interesting.
Right. When
Tell
we
me
actually
why that
are
stood out to you. Tell me why that stood out to you.
We're not, okay. So one of my things that I always on my other platforms, like we as Black people don't talk about these things, and it's to our detriment. So when I got diagnosed with fibroids, I just was kind of like, what? Because I didn't know. I did most of the typical symptoms like the heavy periods and I didn't have that. I just had to pee a lot. Now, looking back when I was in high school, when I was younger, I had absolutely horrible periods. I would get nauseous, heavy bleeding, wouldn't go out of the house. And then when I was in college, I was on birth control. So that kind of smoothed that out. Like in my mid to late 20s, I was like, I took that because I was concerned about the chemicals and like, oh, when I find a man and I want to get pregnant, I don't want to have to go through this. So I took myself off of them. And so from that point on, my periods were kind of much lighter than they had been before. So the ironic thing about that is, I was dating my now husband. We had been dating for maybe like a year or so. And I was just having like weird pains and I was having spotting. And so I was like, am I pregnant? Cause it was kind of mimicking some of those like early symptoms. Okay. So I take a home test and it's negative. So I was like, okay, cool. But let me go to the doctor to get like a blood test. Or see what else is going on.
See what's going on, right?
This doctor lays me on the table. She does, they kind of press on your belly, like on your abdomen. And she says, well, what are you doing about your fibroids? And I said, I'm not doing anything because what are you talking about?
Because that's not why I'm here.
Right. So she's like, yes, you have several like palpable fibroids and so I was just kind of like, okay, let me process this. So then like I call my mom and she's like, yeah, remember I had fibroids. Your aunt had a hysterectomy. So it's like, I find out this is like all the women in my family have had hysterectomies except for my mother because she refused, but she did have a very large fibroid. Most of the women, my aunt, my like older cousins, like my mom's first cousins, they all had some type of issue, and my great aunts, almost all of them had hysterectomies because they had fibroids. So it was like, again, this is not a conversation that we're, and most women are not having that conversation. So I have the surgery, get rid of fibroids. So in all of that, like I said, didn't see anything. It was mostly like spaces. It was probably mostly white women. And I was like, I don't see anything. I was like, I want to kind of talk about this because I don't see anybody talking about this. I was like, I'm going to do a blog. I mean, WordPress, that told you how long ago it was.
You're
I have
right,
my little WordPress blog on, and I used to just like research and, write up, like kind of like blog my experiences, like going to the doctors and the surgery and things like that. And also the research, like I would research and like issues that were going on at the time. Like I remember one of the big things was what was called like a power morsulator. So they would take the fibroids, like if it was big, it was like this like blade, and it would kind of like break down the fibroids if they were large. But there was an issue because it would spread, and if they were like cancerous and they hadn't been tested, then women would get cancer. It was a small percentage that this was happening to, but it was like a big thing at the time. So like talking about those kind of issues, and then Instagram came about. So then I had like the Instagram page. So I was able to kind of like do more like photo blogs and talk about different issues. So the actual blog kind of faded out, and I kept the Instagram page. It was called, well, it's still up. I just don't use it as much. Maybe Mama. Cause I was like, I'm not a baby mama. I'm a maybe mama. So I got blogs. So it started with the fibroids and all of that. So then I started to chronicle my infertility journey, especially when I did my IVF cycle and, like the whole thing. And there is like, so I did find, like I said, it's like 2013, 2015. Like there was a blooming at that time Black infertility community online.
Okay.
So there was, there's a group offline, but it's on online, but it's offline. It's called Fertility for Color Girls, Reverend Stacey Edwards Dunn in Chicago. So she started that based off her own experience. She started a support group in Chicago. And so then she had the idea like, no, other women can benefit from this too.
Right.
So there are support groups, like she gets people to kind of like, I don't want to say charter in that way, but, create fertility support groups for, it's open to Black and brown women, but it's mostly Black women.
Okay.
I didn't have that support group though till like, I kind of was over, but that space online though was helpful.
Would you say that had you had that support group when you were going through, it would have helped?
It would have probably been more. It would have been more helpful in the midst of it. When I did have the group, I was kind of deciding what we were going to do, and it was just good to hear, to see other women like,
got you,
girl. This is what's happening. This is how I feel. I mean, everything from just how you feel to like us people just say like, oh, I had a breakdown today. I'm so tired. I just, those emotional things, or the medical things like, or I went to the doctor and they told me this, and this. Did anybody experience this? So having
just having someone to bounce off of,
and people that understood. Because if you talk to like your girlfriends and you're like, well, the doctor told me that we need to do ICSI and it's IVF and bull, and you're saying it's alphabet soup, and they're like,
I'm sorry, what?
Right. So when you go to a support group or you go to like other people who are going through it, they're like, oh, okay. Are they also going to test your embryos? What grade are your embryos? Like all those type of things. And you have people who understand not only just emotionally what you're going through, but the actual process they understand. So that was helpful. So another young woman, Regina in Chicago, her blog was Broken Brown Egg. So I found
I know who you're talking about.
So I found like those people and kind of like spaces. So that was helpful because it just made me feel like, oh, I wasn't alone. And so I did my little blog. No, I didn't blow up like that, but I have like a nice little like contingent of followers. And more than anything, it was like cathartic for me. And I always just felt like, I don't care if I have like 2 followers. Like if this makes you feel seen or validated or whatever, or this gives you some knowledge, then
and that's why I wanted you to touch on that whole support thing, because somebody's listening that's where you once were, and they don't know their resources. They don't realize the resources are out there. So that's why I want you to talk about
now that. There's so many more. So many people who like are doing like I did, like Instagramming and like vlogging their infertility journey. First of all, just talking about the conditions. This is just general like reproductive health. Like we already know as Black women, we're not listened to, we're not seen. There's stuff called obstetric racism, medical racism. Obstetric racism is about pregnancy related specifically, which is how we get into maternal mortality.
Right.
We know that we're not listened to. We suffer at higher rates of those type of gynecological things like fibroids, PCOS, endometriosis, endomyosis. We suffer those things at higher rates. Anyway, And so those things are going to affect or impair your fertility. But outside of that, it's just your actual health. Like those things are affecting our health. We do suffer from those at higher rates. But up until very recently, we were not talking about it. We were just suffering with horrible periods and surgeries and not be able to go out, all those things, you know, facial hairs and you're like what's going on. Not talking about these conditions are real for women generally, but we are affected by them at higher rates. And I know because I've done research, like actual academic research, like we're suffering from these things at higher rates than white women. We're not seeking the help earlier, and same for fertility. We're not going to get the medical help early. We're trying to, you know, I'll figure it out, or I'm get some herbs and it's the pass, or it's not that big a deal. And, you know, we seek treatment late. So we're already affected by those things more. And to me, it just became, as I learned more over there, it was just like take care of your body, whether you want to have, like, it's not even about the fertility piece.
Right.
This is your body. And if you are bleeding through your clothes every month, your period is on for like 20 days of 30 days of the month.
That's not normal, family.
That's not normal.
Right.
That's not, but we are told that's like, I remember when I was in I was in high school, I had horrible periods. And I remember like kind of saying to my mom, like, this is like, you know, this is not, I felt like this is not right. Yeah. Like, this is not right. And I remember I like read in the library or something about endometriosis and the symptoms. And I was like, ooh, that sounds like me. So I go to my mom, like, I read about this thing called endometriosis. No, this is the 90s. I was in high school and like,
I can't wait to see what her response was. I'm listening.
In the 90s. So, you know, this is like, okay, I was in high school, 93
and
to
mama's
97.
of another generation.
Right. So of course she's like, girl, you don't have no like, you're fine. Women have, you know, it was that, you know, you're a woman, women have periods are uncomfortable. You don't have no endometriosis, whatever.
But my mom's bleeding through my clothes. So.
Right. Like
there's that.
I'm missing days of school. And then it got to the point where mom was like, you're not going to miss any more days of school. Like you know, like you said, it's a different generation. You're fine. Women have periods, you know, one thing about women who didn't even have, you got pads. When I was a kid, we had pads with the buckle and you had to do all this. They stick to your underwear. They're thin. You're okay. You know what I mean? And that's like at the time,
right. Yeah.
That's how it was. So you're like, all right, then she's like, here's some Midol and some Advil and
go to school.
Hot water bottle.
Girl, not the hot water bottle. Not the hot water bottle. And, you went back with that one.
Right. Because that's what we had. We had the hot water bottle. Okay. So like that's how that was. And I just want, you know, even still like now it's a big thing. I'm like, that's not normal. You're having like facial, like you got a beard. That's not normal. Your hormone levels are upside down.
Right.
You should see somebody about that.
So,
no, I mean not in a like in that kind of way, but like no, like
you should see somebody.
You should see somebody.
So tell me, so you've gone through all of this, you have this, I love that you found this support, you know, when you started deciding what to do. So how do you and your husband land at, okay, we're going to go to adoption? And go ahead and turn that corner and take me down that road. Yeah.
So, like I said, so for me, adoption was not like, and for some, you know, I know there's a perception, maybe some adoptees feel like, oh, this was like the last ditch effort. And I can't speak for all the people who are adoptive parents, but that to me, that's not my last resort was we're not going to be parents. So this was just part of the things that were available to be a parent. So, and that's one of the things somebody said was like, do you want to be pregnant or do you want to be a parent?
Yeah.
Which resonated with me, but I'd already adoption was already. So before we had made a decision, I was like researching and I went to an informational meeting to the agency we ended up using, but we hadn't really made the decision. I just wanted to learn because it's so like secret squirrel. Like they don't want you, which I have a problem with.
Hold on, before you go down, before you tell me about this informational meeting, I want to ask you about your husband because there's this thing out there that Black and brown men typically do not want to adopt. So tell me what this was like for him.
So he was not against it. He just wasn't ready to go there yet. Like he thought we should, some of the other medical options that were available, he wanted to, he was kind of like, well, we could try this and we could try that. And I was like,
sir, I'm done.
I don't I see what you're saying. Like, I understand. So that was a discussion, and I was like, I see what you're saying. But me personally, and just to be honest, like thinking about the cost, the actual financial cost of all those things, I was like, I'm okay. I don't really. So there was a time we were kind of like not seeing eye to eye. And again, he wasn't against adoption. He just wasn't ready to make that decision yet. And again, for me, interesting. My great grandmother was orphaned, and she was, if you want to say what we call now kinship adoption, her and her brother went to live with cousins.
Okay.
So there's that. My mother, ironically, many years later, also orphaned, well, partially orphaned. And she and my youngest aunt, because they were the youngest too, another, what we would now say kinship adoption, went to live with aunt and uncle because they already had like 4 other kids. So they were like, just
bring them on.
Was 2 more. My aunt, my mom's oldest sister, got pregnant in high school in the 60s. So you already know where this is going.
Yep. Yep. Bring me that baby.
Right. My grandmother. And so my grandmother's vision was for my aunt to go to college. Like my grandmother, like a lot of women at that time, she did housework. She was a domestic. So she was like, nope, you're going to college.
Right. Bring me that baby.
My aunt pops up pregnant senior year. No, ma'am. So, like I said, we all know the 60s was hush hush, keep you in the house. You have the baby. But in that case, the baby, my cousin, went to my grandmother's best friend, who we now we know like she had infertility and they always wanted children. So he went with, so she adopted him, or they adopted him. My aunt, it was kind of like, this is so weird. Like they were kind of like a bit of an open adoption. Like she was around, typical kind of Black people, almost like, this year you think your mom is your sister or your cousin, and then you find out later, right? So she was kind of around, but he was told that she was someone else, and then it came out, later. They do have a relationship, because to the point that I didn't realize till I was older, when I put 2 and 2 together, I was like, oh, okay, right. So we have that. I have a cousin. We're the first family. I have a male cousin who had a lot of children. Not going to get into that. But she was adopted when she turned 18. Well, a little bit before she turned 18, she found her grandmother, my great aunt. She found us. We were happy to have a family reunion that year. Her grandmother, my aunt, invited her to family reunion. And it was like, for those of us who were younger, we were like, oh, we got another cousin. Hey, girl, welcome. And then also, ironically, my aunt, who was kind of forced to place her child in the 60s, her husband had a daughter who had a son whom she was not able to take care of. It was like a whole, kind of like, services were involved, CYS services were involved. And so he was, again, kinship through foster care placed with them. So she now is parenting at like 80 years old, parenting a teenager. But she's had him since he was 6 months old. So to me, again, as you said, like adoption, whether it's
all
like
former
kinship,
or kinship,
was in my family. And I have a close friend, a close college friend who's an adoptee. So it was just like, okay, like it didn't,
definitely not a foreign concept to you.
I won't say it didn't mean anything. It wasn't anything like strange to me or anything for me that had any like taboo or stigma to it. It was just like their family, because I think of my family who are, in adopted. Even though they are technically family, blood family, except for, like I said, my cousin who found us, who we didn't know her. When I think about that, like I didn't feel any type of like, who is this person? I was like, okay, cool. Like,
and I'm glad to hear you say that, because
I got another cousin.
There are some adoptees that think that if they find their family, it's going to be like horrible rejection. And I love to hear people talk about the good side of reunion. So
now I will say, like I said, so she found her grandmother, so my great aunts and uncles. Now some of the older generation might have been a little more
because Yeah, because my secret's out now. What are
Right.
you
Like, so
doing?
they would have
Right.
been a little more like, but again, her grandmother, my great aunt, was excited to meet her because, again, with her son, who was the father, like, he just had, he had some, it was just kind of in the streets, basically. So he has multiple children, and it was just like, we're glad to, like, that the ones that we didn't know existed, we're glad
We're glad to bring you
find
in
them
to
and
the
bring them
fold.
in.
Right,
And so,
right.
like, yeah, she is part of our family. In fact, she has done most of, like, some of the genealogy work on that side, like, probably because she missed, not growing up in our family.
Right.
It's been something that she's really been into, because the rest of us haven't really, like, done that work. And she's done a lot of work on the genealogy of our family.
Right, because she's trying to learn who she is.
Right,
so you go to this information session.
Yeah.
At the adoption agency. And
yeah.
Yep. Oh, okay. What happened?
And so, like I said, I kind of, like, I won't say I went rogue, because we were still in the discussions. We had not figured out what the next thing was. Were we going to be child free? We just going to do child free? Are we going to try this IVF again? Like, we hadn't really. And I just wanted to know, because you couldn't, there's not a lot of information. Like, how does this even work? Like, what is happening? Like, how does it work? How do I get started? Like, what? So I went, this was obviously pre-COVID, went in, and it was interesting. They kind of, like, explained the process. And I was like, okay.
Private adoption?
Like, private. Yes, this was a private agency. So I was just like, okay. I liked them, but again, like, we weren't ready to, like, start anything. So they emailed kind of like a follow-up email a couple of days later. And I was like, oh, we're not, I just wanted the information. We're not really at that place yet. I just wanted to know, learn some information. Another thing that was said there was like, even if you like us, the things that we're saying here, don't just go with us, explore, go to other information meetings with other agencies, because every agency is different. And I kept that in mind for later once we, went down that path. So that was maybe 2018.
Okay.
And so, like, again, like, we're just kind of having these talks, figure things out. Then here comes COVID. So we're just having, and it was, to be honest, it was kind of a tense time, because I'm ready to do this. My husband's still like, let's talk about this. And so there was a lot of, like, discourse. And I would say that's one of the, like, a positive of COVID. Like, my husband still was considered essential. So he did leave the house to work, but he did like 12-hour shifts and then 2 days off. So we had enough time apart to, like, be apart, but time to chill together. So we had a lot of discussions, and we had a lot of, like, talks about family, and, what do we see, and I had asked, like, are you okay? Like, are you okay with just us being, like, fun auntie, uncle? Like, we pick up the kids, and, he was like, yeah, I'm okay with that. I had to, so I have been in there. So I also have been in therapy, for multiple things. Like, we had moved to where we are now. It was like a new location. I'm going through like IVF, and it was just a lot. So I have been in therapy, kind of like working through multiple things, especially kind of the grief and loss, because there is grief and loss associated with infertility. So there is something called infertility trauma, which, again, like, there's research that says, like, going through infertility, a lot of people have depression levels that are equal with those with, like, chronic diseases, like, terminal diseases like HIV, AIDS. So there's a lot of, like, depression, stress, feelings of loss of control. And I say this, like, in this academic way, because I've researched it, and we can get into that later. Like, you do have those feelings, and there is, the biggest thing is grief and loss, because you are grieving whatever you thought parenthood was going to look like, or just your life, not even parenthood. You have this vision of what you think your life is going to be. And it's not that. No fault of your own. This is just where you are. So grieving that, going through your self-esteem, because you do, even though it's not your fault, it still feels like it's I am a woman. My body is designed to do this one thing, essentially. Like, you had one job, and you can't do that one job.
Yeah.
So I have been in therapy, kind of like already working, and I do always say that, and I've seen a lot of people on both sides, like, I've seen other adoptees or maybe, like, adoption professionals, and I co-sign that. 1,000% as someone who has been through infertility. No matter what you decide to do, if you don't parent, if you end up getting pregnant, if you adopt, no, you have to work through that stuff. Because
I'm glad you're saying that, because that's a step that's missed.
I think a lot of people just go
right over
forward, and then you have issues sometimes. I think when I hear other adoptee stories and I hear some of the things that their parents, especially the mothers, have done or said, and first of all, it hurts me because I'm like, who would say that to a child?
They didn't work through.
Who would do that to a child? Who would say that to a child? But then, as somebody who's been through it, like, there's stuff that you didn't.
Yeah, man. Especially the older generation, some of those people, they didn't know, right? And especially in the Black community, we are just going to therapy.
Right.
Just now.
Right. So they weren't going in the 60s and 70s.
They were not.
80s. You weren't going to therapy. You were like, I'm going to be all right. Or I'm going to pray about it.
I'm going to pray about it. We're going to keep it pushing.
Right. And it's like, and I hear those things, and it really, it breaks my heart because, again, just somebody who likes children and used to work with children, that's just generally, I don't like people who mistreat children like that. Gets to me in a way that I can't explain. And like I said, because I've worked with children, I used to be a first grade teacher, that just people who are mean to children or mistreat children. And
sometimes, and people would go through this, not have therapy, and then just whatever's on the inside, this is what's coming out.
It comes out in
all those different ways.
The things that you say, the things that you do. So
and
I think
the child is the one that
and they catch the brunt of it.
They catch it, right?
Because you're unhealed, and
that part. You're unhealed. Pray and go to therapy. Y'all already know. I already told you. Pray and go to therapy.
Can do both. God created therapy.
The therapist. Come on.
He blessed somebody with the intelligence and the schooling
God put
to
them
do
here
it.
to do it. So y'all stop skipping that step.
And FYI, there are therapists who are also faith-based parents.
That's right.
I had one. In fact, she left to go into full-time ministry, and I was like, no. Praise the Lord. But also, no.
Don't go come back. Not your calling. Come back.
Not come back. No, and she was such a great therapist. She was such a great therapist.
That's
but
hilarious.
That was a calling on her life, and she wanted to go into ministry.
For that.
Time. And, like I said, it was, and that's one of the reasons she was so great. It was the science and the academics, but she also brought in the spiritual part of it. So for those who have
those that need
there are therapists who integrate both. So that's not an excuse. Go to therapy.
Go to therapy. That's sure. So you guys get to this point.
Yeah. So we get there,
and you get there. So what does your adoption process look like?
So I reached back out to so I took their advice. I knew that the agency that we ended up going with, that was first place, I knew we were going to go with them. First of all, I had, in my support group here, myself and three other ladies charter a support group here in this area, in the Philadelphia area. So having that, there were two people who worked for that agency, but on the foster. So this agency had a private side and then a foster, they worked in the system side. So they worked on that on the other side. And they're like, no, they're really great. And that's how I found out about this agency. But I took their advice and I did go to some informational meetings with other agencies. Did not like the things that I heard about. There were two things that didn't sit well with me. So I will never forget sitting on the Zoom, and I think I was like, okay, I'm going to log out of this meeting right now because you're a no. First thing was how they approached interracial. It was some language they had around interracial adoption. And I did not like it at all. And I remember putting in the chat, because you couldn't, it wasn't like Zoom, it was some type of just webinar platform, and all it was open was chat. And I just remember typing furiously, if you don't have the, it just completely, I was like, I don't like how you're handling that. And the other thing was, they were saying we do XYZ placements, adoptions a year. And I didn't like the number because I felt like it seemed very high. And one of the things when I decided to, when we made this decision, and one of the things that I always prayed about was I don't want anyone to feel, I don't want a situation where someone is coerced, forced, or unsure about the decision that they're making. And with the high numbers that they were saying, to me, it just didn't feel right. It felt like,
what's
if
going
there's
on
this,
here?
you're doing this many, there might be some regret in here. There might be, like, it just didn't feel right to me. It felt, I didn't like it. So I was like, nope. So like the next day I emailed the woman who had like followed up with me, but like a year before, I was like, hey, we're kind of ready to, hop back into this. So we did another informational meeting. And then we had then they assigned us someone to just kind of speak with us about the process and start that, put our application in to get the ball rolling.
Okay.
So we start this in, was it 2020? I feel like time. I guess it was 2020 because everything was like Zoom.
Okay.
But it was like in the summer. So everything was like, it was, because everything was like over, like literally everything, all the meetings with the adoption coordinator, everything was over Zoom. So, they sent us the packet and we're, doing all this work. For me, the heaviest part was they ask you about your family of origin. They ask you all these things about your family, about your marriage for those who are married, about yourself, like how were you brought up? And it makes you kind of go inside because you're like, it asks you things that you're like, oh, I never thought about the actual dynamics of my family growing up. Like how, or like, they ask like, how do you handle conflict within your marriage? And it's like, you kind of take for granted, oh, this is how we do it. And then when someone asks you and you think like, well, are we doing this in a healthy way? How often do we, it's the things that you kind of take for granted.
It makes you start doing that inner work.
And you're like, right. So it was like some inner work. And in the midst of that, this is kind of where maybe before that I suggested to my husband, because I felt like he hadn't processed the infertility, like the grief with that. I was like, I feel like you haven't really processed it. I think we had talked about this before we started this process. And also my husband is a caretaker for his father.
Okay.
And it's that's a lot. Those who are caretakers for elderly, that's a lot as well. And I could tell that was also way, especially during COVID. It was just like he couldn't get to, so it was a lot. And I was like, I think you kind of, I was like, I think you kind of stressed about taking care of your dad and helping with your dad. And I don't think you dealt with in that way, like in a more existential way. So my husband was also into, so we're a therapy house. Like we went to therapy
so glad that
separately. We didn't do joint therapy, but we did our own individual therapy. So we're on top of that. So you on top of whatever work we're doing as we're going through this paperwork and having to answer these bio sketches for each of us separately about ourselves and our family, he and I, and then our families of origin. And then the home study process, when they kind of dig into and ask you those questions and what do you think about this? What are your philosophies on parenting? Like all these things, we're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then of course at the same time, we're taking classes. So this agency, mandated, I think we had to have like 7 hours. I think it was like equivalent of like 8 hours. So it was like 1 hour plus. They weren't, let me just say, they were not always just 1 hour. Sometimes it was like full morning, like you were on Zoom, like all day.
all day.
But it was really great. Like they talked about, like child development. Like this is normal child development, but with an adoption lens. So this is what's appropriate to talk about adoption as an infant, as a toddler, as a teenager. Like these are the things they talk about. They gave you all these different.
Hold on, I want to ask you about that. How beneficial do you think that talk was when it's beneficial to talk
for me, I think one of the things I want to say about my agency, as again, like kind of being in this adoption like space now and hearing other parents, adoptive parents, or either adoptees, I realize how, I don't want to say unique, but how I think my agency kind of does it right, if you want to say that. Because there are some things where I'm like, oh, y'all didn't do that? Or your person told you that? Okay.
That's why I stopped you right there, because I don't think I've heard anybody ever say their adoption agency had that
we
conversation,
had a lot
because
of
it's so
classes
important
about like different things like something that's almost like small as, but for those who it's not very common, especially with our agency who did like pre-birth matching. So like, okay, going to the hospital, this is if you're going to the hospital and you're meeting with mom, this is how you approach it. You need to be sensitive. You also need to realize that she may change her mind at any given moment. So don't come in there and start snatching a baby out people's arms, because that's not your baby. Like, they're literally telling you, like, that's not your baby. I know you've had it agreed. Like, that's not at this point, that's not your baby.
Right.
So when you're coming into this, if you're somebody who's pre-matched, or you are matched at the hospital, baby still at the hospital, mom and other, other family, depending on the situation, she may have the dad or her parents or sisters or brothers. There may be other family. They
actually addressed that.
Yes, they did.
Wow.
Yeah. So, like, that's what I'm saying. So those type, and I like, again, like, so, right. I'm realizing after the fact, like, oh, other agencies aren't.
Yes, they are
talking about that.
Yes, they are. Yes.
And like, I did, like, again, like, sometimes you don't realize maybe how good you have it. Like, you're kind of in a bubble. Like, I didn't realize other people
or if
are
they
saying
are,
that.
if they are addressing it, they're just kind of grazing over it.
Yeah.
No,
like, we had
to the
a whole thing about, like, I mean, some of it was like just things about baby care. Like, okay, you have a newborn baby. Like, what any mom would say, okay, you have a newborn baby, hold him like this, baby, some of it was just things about having a baby. Some of them were things specific about adoption.
So did you have an open or a closed adoption?
So our adoption is right now semi-open. So we were able to meet our son's mom, via Zoom, as she was making her decision, as she was finalizing her decision.
And she was still pregnant at the time?
No, he was already born.
He was here. Okay.
Initially, she wanted like a visit once or twice a year, which we were fine with. But over time, like, that just never materialized. So it's right now, it's just the notes and the photos that we send to the agency. And for me, I know that she, whatever, given the circumstances, I know she's processing whatever whatever the circumstances were, how her feelings, she's processing that. So she may come back around. Maybe not. I do know she set the legal paperwork that when he's 18, he can search everything, but he will have everything that we have right now. He has access to the paperwork, the things that we have, the information that we have about her and her family, some of the circumstance things that we know. We will be, we're not going to gatekeep that. You can know that as soon as, at age appropriate level.
Right.
But we don't plan to ever keep any of that from him.
Let me ask you this. Having a semi-open adoption, and I always ask my adoptive parents, I just want to know your opinion. Do you think that that is going to be confusing for your son? I
don't know. It's kind of hard to say. My son's only 2, right? So so it's hard to say what he'll think. Unfortunately, we don't have, it's like one way. We don't have any pictures of her or her family.
Gotcha.
So unfortunately, I can't be like, this is so-and-so.
Okay. So it's more like you have the information to give him. You don't necessarily have pictures.
Yeah, we don't
But
have
he can
pictures.
grow up knowing what it is.
Yeah.
And I think as an adoptee that grew up knowing what it was, that's going to be beneficial.
That's good.
Yeah, my parents never lied to me about that. I always knew.
Yeah.
And I was not ever upset about being adopted. I was not, was not ashamed to be adopted. That just is not my testimony. And that was never mine.
And that's what we don't want for him. So I never want him to feel like he's different. I mean, you're different because it's not everybody's story, right? But I don't want you to feel like you're outcasted or there's something wrong with you.
No,
there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with, and I also don't want him, of course, I can't control how he feels at any time, right? Yeah. But I also don't want him to have like the anger at her. Like, as he gets older and we process that more, we could talk more about it.
I didn't have that. And, again, it's me. I didn't have that either. And I say this often on my podcast. I can't explain why I was never mad at her. Right. I just wasn't. And it may have been the fact that I knew growing up. It could have been the fact that I was living my best life.
Right.
I had a great child.
Right. I heard like you were living a life. You had cousins. Y'all were out here. Like,
listen, and still are. And still.
I love it.
Still. And so, and then when I did meet them, I was like, thank you, God.
I get it.
I understand.
I get it. I get why you did that.
I get it. And I'm still not mad. There's some people I've heard that say, I don't care what the circumstances were. I would rather have been there. That's not my testimony.
Yeah. And I will say, for me, and I think for some, like I see in some like online spaces, like as adoptive parents, like I know for me, I didn't know that there was like this other side. So we're in the midst of this, and I don't even know how I fell into like a maybe like a Reddit thing, like somewhere I fell into this, and I was like, say what now? Like I just because you don't know that, even though I had adoption in my family, a lot of it was kinship. There are some that were like outside, but it was, I didn't know that there was that kind of thing. Now I will be honest, some of the people in my family who are adoptees, I see where it affected them. I don't think they're angry or upset or anything like that, but I can see where the circumstances, but also I know the circumstances, so I can I can see where when that happened, I can see where that would make me feel
and
that type of way.
Now I can speak to that. Like I wasn't angry or anything, but as I've gotten older and I understand this thing more, I can now say, oh, okay, I understand now why I responded like this, or why I was like, I get it now. But this is as an adult.
Now, like I said, now that I know more, I'm like, that makes sense. That makes sense. They do that. And so when I discovered that there's like this other side where people that were like abolitionists and like being like they're and I'm just like,
me too. Clutch my
me. I was like, who, me? I didn't. But then also, and as I read, I'm like, as I kind of read more, once the shock kind of was like, okay. Then I was like, okay, now I can kind of like read or listen with a different
understand what's
ear.
happening.
And I'm
here.
like, okay, like in some of this, some people's stories, I'm like, I would be pissed off too.
And that's why
this happened to me, or I found out later that this is like when I hear people say like their mom was lied to, and people are like, oh, they told my mom I died. And they whisked me away to another family. Like, oh, I'll be very pissed off too. The mom, the birth mother should be pissed.
Everybody's story is so different.
Right.
That's why I just say that's just not my testimony.
Right.
But there are circumstances out there where they have every right to be angry.
Absolutely.
For sure.
And so like finding that side was kind of like jarring.
It is.
But like I said, I took it in, and I think there was a point where I took in too much, because even once we had him, like, I couldn't enjoy, I would say, couldn't. I was so worried about like, am I doing this? Am I doing that? Is he going to think this? Is he going to think that?
Don't do that
that
to yourself.
That I wasn't right. And I had to say to myself, no parent, whether they're the biological parent or not, can control how their child's going to feel about you as their parent or their circumstances. All you can do is do the best you can. I have the information. I have the knowledge. So,
and then you have
us. Right. And I have, like I said, and then by being in this place, I met other adoptees, and they're like, and like I said, I made a friend with a adoptee. We were like, we're just hanging out. And it was something that she said. And I was like, oh, because in my mind, I was like, that's how I'm going to do it. That seems like the right way. And it wasn't something I said to her. It was just something she happened to say about like having the conversations. Like when you get older, like her parents, like, whenever you want to talk about it, I'm here. And she's like, but then I felt like it was on me, and I knew what my mom had gone through. So I didn't want to bring it up because I didn't want to make her sad. So I'm like, I didn't think of it that way. I'm thinking as a parent, I'm having an open line of communication. Like, you can talk to us about it anytime, which, okay, but maybe there are times we need to breach the subject because you might feel a little like,
I can say this.
You know what I mean? Like, so
I was insensitive to that in my early 20s and my teenage years when I started really asking a lot of questions just because I was young.
Right.
And as I got older, I became more aware of that concerning, my parents. But they also were very supportive in me doing the reunion and, both times when I went to go find them. So I think it's just a matter of you just got to meet people where they are.
Where they are. Yeah. And that's what I've come to like. I can't predict how he's going to feel. I can just
The only thing
we could
you
just do what
can
we can do.
is tell him, and I know you will. And, so he grows up knowing, and he's not ashamed, because it's nothing to be, well, personal opinion, it's nothing to
Right.
be ashamed of.
Right.
I was, I talk about it all the time, how proud I was, and still am, to
Like,
be
he
adopted. I was
knows
telling the world
already.
at
He knows
2.
the
Oh my
word
gosh.
adoption. Or I say he knows the word adoption. Like, he probably doesn't. Now he's getting a little bit older, I think. So we started with such like books about family. Like, there are a lot of books now with different types of family, like that explain, so sometimes a mom and dad, sometimes it's 2 moms, sometimes it's just the dad, sometimes people live with their grandparents. So we talk about those type of things early, like just the concept of family, and that, everybody's family is different, but everybody's fit like, and so I have a human development and family science background. That's one of the first things when you talk about family science, that now they're telling you, like, your first class is like, okay, so if it's a functional family unit, it's a family. It doesn't matter if it's a gang of cousins that live together, like whatever it is, if it's a functional unit, right, then it's a family. So that's kind of how we talk about. Now we're talking more about adoption. Like, sometimes I'll tell him at night, like, the story, like when we went to meet him for the first time and pick him up. And sometimes we just say, like, there's a story, like, let's say one of his books talks about different ways of making family, and it says some kids are adopted. So it's like adopted. It's like you adopted. And I said, that means you have, like I said, you had a mommy that had you in her belly. And then she chose mommy and daddy to be your mommy and daddy and love you every day forever. Right. So that's like the basic thing.
Yeah,
and that's like, that's where we are at this point. But completely plan to talk about it. And we're so completely supportive of him finding, if his, first mom doesn't reach out while he's, before he's 18, and they don't have connection before he's 18, I'm totally supportive. We'll do DNA, or what you need me to call and help you get records, whatever you want to do, because I guess for us, like I said, because A is just who my husband and I are, just our personalities. And I think because we went to therapy, and because even with his family having, like, a lot of people have like mixed families, and you marry, somebody marries somebody and they already have kids. And so you're kind of integrated. Family, we all have both those types of things. And so it's like, he and I just happen to be people who are not so narrow on, like, this is family. So I don't think feel any type of way of, like, I'm not threatened. Like, if I get an email tomorrow from an agency that says his mom is around, she'd like to talk, I'm not going to go into like panic, but now he's not going to love me anymore. And that's not how I feel about it. Like, that's not how I feel about it. She is his mother, just like I'm his mother. We're different. We're moms in different ways, but she is his mother, and I am also his mother. Right. And that's okay. Like, that's okay. I don't feel any type of way about that.
I love that you're putting that out there, because people need to hear that, because there's some people that would be totally threatened by that. And it's no reason to be threatened by that.
And I thought about it I was just thinking about it the other day, and I was like, at some point, whatever point it is, that if he ever gets into reunion, it's like, I'm also not threatened. I get to see him every day. I get to see his development. He gets to make me look, because he has personality. Okay. Like, I get to, we get to experience him every day. I get to hug him every day. I get to, like, watch him laugh every day and grow, and see him grow and discover. I get to do that every day. She's missing out on those things. Yeah. So if you see him twice a year and he hugs on her and she's excited, like, what does that's not threatening to me. He would have those moments with her. I don't feel threatened by
because
that.
I can speak to that, because I found both sides, but it was never about replacing my parents.
Yeah, I don't feel that way, because we're different, and also we're different people. You know what I mean? Like, we're different people. There are different things that we would have to offer. So I personally don't feel like threatened by that. But I know, but at the same time, I know there are still some adoptive parents who feel very much so like,
and that's why
you're not going to love me anymore if you find your mom and dad.
That's a therapy session,
right? That's where you get. That's where you go into therapy and talk about it.
Go sit on the couch.
Because that's not, and I don't want to hinder him in any way. And again, like, it's up to him if he wants to find, if he doesn't want to find, like, whatever you want to do, like, we're supportive of. And that's my thing, is just, I just want him, my wish for him is just to be himself. Like, I said that from like the moment like he was placed, and I was like, I want you to grow up to be who you are, whatever that's going to be. I want you to feel, and this, I think this has nothing to do with adoption, just as a parent, like, I want you to be comfortable in your skin. If you're the weirdo in the group, be the weirdo in the group. If you are the bougie person that want to have it, whoever you're going to be that.
And do it well.
And just be who you are. And I think that's probably because, as like in our generation, sometimes you weren't allowed to be yourself. You didn't get to be yourself till and about then you have to rediscover yourself, because, it's so, like, when I think about these generational, you get like the boomer discussion and millennial. It's like the little Gen X, y'all just lost in the sauce,
and we're okay with it.
Right. But it's like there's some attributes that we have. Like, there are some of the attributes that we have, and it's like were stuck in that middle. Like, no, we're not in some ways as free as like Gen Z or millennial, but we're not as stuck in our ways. Not in
the boomers,
and like as boomers are. Right. So we're in that middle space, and I think we have like some of those old things, like where you children are to be seen and not heard. We had, like, a lot of us grew up in that space, or like, this is how you are supposed to be. But our difference is, like, after a while, we're like, no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I don't want to do that, and I'm not going to.
And so I'm going to be me. And so it's like, I want him to know early, like,
Right. So let me
ask you. He has a personality, so he's going to be somebody.
Well,
he's going to be something.
He's definitely going to be somebody, because I see his mama. He's definitely going to be somebody.
Oh, for sure. Yes.
Let me ask you my last favorite question. If you had anything to leave with parents or mothers or whomever that's going through that infertility, what would you say to them?
Infertility is not your fault. Infertility is a disease just like lupus or diabetes. It is a medical condition. It's not something for most people that you did to yourself. So it's not your fault. So take that guilt off yourself. It's nothing that you did, because there is guilt and shame in infertility, which sometimes leads to guilt and shame in adoption, because that's how some people end up not telling, because they are ashamed that they couldn't have a biological child. So you try to just slide in a baby and act as if it is your biological, that's a whole nother thing. But that has to deal with guilt and your own guilt and shame and societal guilt and shame. But that's a whole nother topic. But let go of that. And I think just go through it, and whatever you decide for you and your family is okay. If you decide to live child free and just you by yourself, or you and your spouse, right? You decide to be rich auntie and uncle and just be, that's okay. Like, don't let people guilt you, especially in this economy. Kids expensive. Listen, don't let people pigeonhole you into what you want to do. If you don't want to go through fertility treatments, you don't want to explore fostering or adoption, you just want to live your life, that's perfectly okay. If you want to go through infertility treatment after, that's okay. That's okay too. If you want to look, whatever you decide is okay, because it's what's best for you and your family. I would say medically, ask all the questions. Don't let them tell you what's best for you. If you don't understand, and this is just anybody, especially Black women in medical spaces, ask the questions. If you are uncomfortable, ask a question. If you request a test and they won't run it, keep asking. If they refuse, like they said, like you make them note that you asked for something and they wouldn't give it to you. Make them put that in your chart. Go seek a second opinion, seek a third opinion. Don't, don't, just because they're a physician doesn't mean they're the smartest person in the room. They just have the training, in this area. You are the expert on yourself and your body. So don't be intimidated in these medical spaces. Ask the questions. Advocate for yourself.
That's it.
And I would say,
advocate for yourself.
Advocate for yourself. And I would say, if you're coming into an adoption space, advocate for yourself, advocate for your child, and, also ask the questions. If there's something you don't understand about adoption process, ask the social worker or adoption coordinator, whoever you're dealing with. Ask those questions. Ask questions about the circumstances, not because like it's something you're going to reject, but make sure that everything is on the up and up, that there's no, and when you're picking an agency, look for quote unquote ethical things. You know what I mean? Like there are, the information is much better now. Things are out there. But I would say infertility, it's not your fault. Don't feel guilty. Don't feel ashamed. Do what's best for you and go to therapy. Again, regardless of, because there is a lot of, beating yourself up and isolation and depression, and like those things are real. Infertility trauma is a real thing. And no matter what you're going to do about it, you need to deal with it. If you can find a support group, I definitely recommend. Of course, I'm going to shout out Fertility for Color Girls. They're in most major metropolitan
and I will drop
areas.
their link in the description.
So finding a support space is also helpful. Even if you just find a girlfriend or somebody that you trust to talk about it with, having community, find community, build community, because it will make the journey a little, the burden a little less light when you do that.
That's why I wanted to have you on. I want to thank you for that, to have this conversation, because you don't hear this conversation a lot. And like you said early on, you definitely don't hear it a lot amongst us. And when I say us, I mean Black women.
I'll come back a whole nother day and just talk about
just that.
Because like I said, I did research for my thesis on infertility and Black women's experiences. I did my master's thesis on that. So I have like a lot. A lot of data.
Just what you gave us today is enough for someone to take and ponder and go back and listen twice, 3 times. And you gave a lot of good advice because of your experience, and it's not your fault. And I love that.
Yeah, it's nothing wrong. It's not your fault.
It isn't. And you're not by yourself.
Yeah, and you're not by yourself. It's the statistics are what now. I think it's lower. It used to be 1 in 8. I think now it's 1 in 6.
Yeah, you're
women
definitely not alone.
Suffer through infertility. Men too. It's not just women. Sometimes the infertility is male is male, is on the male. Sometimes it's both.
Right.
So let's just clear that up too. It's not always the women. Ooh. And also infertility is not a rich white lady thing. Because that's the other thing.
On that note.
It happens to everybody.
And on that note, right. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your story. You're very welcome. You have helped somebody today. I promise you that. I promise you that. So. And until next week, bye, family.
Journey on. You need a pie with the good? Oh yeah, what's the one?